In the 1960s, French President Charles de Gaulle vetoed the UK's attempts to join what is now the EU. However, after his successor Georges Pompidou took office, France reversed its opposition to British entry and the UK officially joined what is now the European Union. Journalist Christopher Broder and researcher Richard North claim in their 2003 book The Great Deception Britain was actually fooled into believing that its entry was the product of Mr Pompidou and the UK Prime Minister Ted Heath's chemistry. Mr Brooker and Mr North wrote, throughout the 1960s France was driven by her desire to establish a CAP which was not really an agricultural policy at all. The two authors insisted it was instead a matter of political and economic gains for France. The CAP was a political and social policy, designed to protect French farmers for the ultimate purpose of protecting the French state. Only in 1969, when France had finally ensured that other countries would subsidize her farmers, did the French actively need British entry. This was because, in being forced to impose levies on imports on food from the Commonwealth, the proceeds of which would go direct to Brussels to fund the CAP, Britain would simultaneously be handing over the cash to subsidize French farmers and providing a market for their surpluses. Nothing demonstrates more completely how far the British were derived by this stratagem than the touching belief of Heath, Young, Denman and others that France's reversal of her opposition to British entry stemmed somehow from the personal chemistry between Heath and Pompidou. Mr Brooker and Mr North continued their epilogue asserting that when Ted Heath requested to join the common market, it began for the British people the biggest deception of all, which ultimately handed the UK's sovereignty over to Brussels. They said, without any electoral mandate, having barely mentioned Europe during his 1970 election campaign, on arriving in office Heath almost immediately applied for entry. What were presented as negotiations were no more than a prolonged act of surrender, on everything from the Commonwealth to the CAP. It was summed up by O'Neill as swallow it whole and swallow it now. The authors added, even more blatantly than 1961, Heath persistently misrepresented Britain's membership of the common market as no more than a trading issue. Behind the scenes this was already being given the lie by the Werner and Avignon proposals for monetary and political union.